And hello again, one final time today. I am Gyasi, the Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Coalition, and I advocate for a real end to the tale of two cities, one where every New Yorker has a meaningful pathway out of poverty. I have the pleasure now of introducing our final panel discussion of the day, and if you're just coming back in from workshops, come on in, have a seat, and then they'll start in a minute. This panel is Partnering to End the Cycle of Incarceration. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Castle, the Justice Initiative's Associate for the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Gyasi Headen, the Vice President of Workforce Development at the Osborne Association, New York City Council Member Keith Powers, the Chairman of the Committee on Criminal Justice. Deputy Commissioner Taussig was not able to join us, got pulled away at the last minute, and Chris Watler. Chris Watler, the Executive Director at the Center for Employment Opportunities. Once again, our moderator for the final panel is Andre Ward from WBAI's On the Count. Andre, take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good, good. Right toward the end of the day. I know everyone's ready to go home and get something to eat or just relax. But we thank you for joining this august esteemed body of people who are on this stage to really talk about something really important around partnering to end the cycle of incarceration. So I'll jump right into it. The first question is in terms of, we're talking about jails to jobs. And I know all of you have some understanding of this, are familiar with it, are really committed to supporting this. And so the question is what is jail to jobs? And what is the impetus behind it? And I'll start with you, Sarah, to answer that question.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. So as you may have heard, the mayor announced that we would be closing Rikers Island in 10 years. And so our efforts are really all in service of that. And so in March 2017, the mayor announced the Jails to Jobs initiative, which is part of a larger city reentry initiative. And so I'll sort of start by kind of explaining the different parts of it. So first, this new project involves when someone comes into Department of Correction custody, so there's expanded risk and need assessment that happens to identify what needs someone is presenting with. And then the next piece is 5 hours of programming that's run by the Department of Correction in partnership with many different nonprofit organizations. And that includes discharge planning, reentry planning for individuals' particular needs. And then once people come out into the community, there's this kind of jails to jobs piece, which is paid short-term transitional employment in service of permanent employment. And that can be in many different kinds of industries. And the idea is that the training starts while people are in custody and is kind of a continuum of services as they come out so that they're being prepared the whole way through. Jails to Jobs also includes supportive services because we know that not everyone is immediately job ready once they come out of jail. And it also includes job training services and the Jails to Jobs program is really enacted by 7 nonprofit service provider organizations, so some of which we have up here as well. And so those organizations are the Osborne Association, the Fortune Society, Samaritan Daytop Village, FedCap, Friends of Island Academy does a youth-specific network, and the Women's Prison Association does a women's-specific network, and Housing Works also. And all of those organizations have subcontracts with smaller organizations. And that was really intentional because we wanted to make sure that this Jails to Jobs initiative was a reentry network, that we're building relationships between organizations that are already doing the work and to provide capacity so that someone comes in with multiple different kinds of needs, that they can be easily linked up to a bunch of different organizations that can serve that person. And then the last piece of Jails to Jobs is around a partnership that we have with the Prisoner Reentry Institute at John Jay College as part of CUNY. And there are 2 pieces of that. One is providing access to higher education for people leaving jail. So the Prisoner Reentry Institute runs a class on Rikers Island and then engages people once they leave. And then the other part is a peer navigator certification program. And so we're really seeing that it's best practice to be using people who have had past involvement in the criminal justice system to be working with others who are going through that system to help stabilize and connect them to services that are helpful. And our contracted providers employ peers in various capacities also. And so the certification program is to help capacitate those folks and also to provide another on-ramp into higher education. So those are the nuts and bolts.
And Councilman Chris, Gyasi, any other comments to add to Sarah's comments?
She did a pretty good job explaining it, but I would kind of go back to the point she made at the beginning, which is this is really in service of trying to reduce a population here for the long term. When we talk about the closure of Rikers Island, which many people hear about, that is about the physical closure of a jail, which many have documented being woefully out of date and need for modern jail facilities. But it's really also in service, I think was the word you used, which is the right word, of a larger goal, which is reducing the population that are in those city jails every single day. And we know that things like employment can lead to ensuring that people don't make it in there in the first place, and also that if they do, they come out and they can land on their feet and are not returning back to that. So as we go from, we are going to be down to the goal of 5,000 people from a high of almost 20,000 decades, a couple decades ago, and 9 today. Part of that is having appropriate services for preventative, but also when you're leaving to make sure that you're not reoffending and you're not ending back up in the jail. So it's part of a large ecosystem that the city has and is trying to create to prevent people and from coming back to Rikers Island, but also obviously to destigmatize any time spent in a city jail.
And so speaking in that similar kind of frame around jails to jobs, there's this challenge of like engaging sometimes participants or people that we serve who are like hard to reach. And so the question is like, what are some of the keys to making a workforce program work for clients that are kind of hard to reach and hard to engage? Chris, Gyasi, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this. So, to me, when you think about jails, there's, something comes into your head, right? Right? Not a good place. You think about jobs, and think about the ability to work, for all of us in this room, I'm assuming are working, what that does in our life, what we're able to do. And so for participants who are coming to CEO through this collaborative, what we're doing is we're providing immediate transitional work. So I think that's important to kind of emphasize. So from an engagement perspective, you're saying to someone, you're leaving jail, you may not have worked before jail, you may not have a job leaving jail, but we are now providing you immediate work. So I think that's one of the kind of important pieces of this strategy. The other thing that we want to do, and Sarah referenced it, is really think intentionally about how to involve people who are formerly incarcerated in the work. So at CEO, working with the mayor's office and other partners, we've started a credible messenger program targeting the younger folks who are kind of coming out of incarceration. And what we're seeing is greater program adherence because they're working with these mentors and they're working to create a kind of positive peer culture in the program. So that for us is really interesting, and we'll be looking at that more closely as time goes on. And that's some of the the work when we're partnering with the city, partnering with Osborne and other partners, the ability to do that. And the final thing I'll mention is that the research on CEO, the kind of randomized control trial study of CEO, one of the things it showed is that immediate attachment to work upon release was important. Right? So when we are getting the folks soon after they come out of incarceration, you're able to have more of an impact, on their kind of long-term, desistance from, further crime. So it's not just the availability of work, it's the immediate availability of work. And then that, for us, that rolls into training them and getting them ready, usually within 3 months, for a permanent job placement.
Mm-hmm. And I know Gyasi at Osborne, they're using this credible messenger approach too in some way. And they'll talk to us about some of those things too. around making things work for clients?
When you talk about the engagement piece, it's really important for us as an organization. We have programming inside the jail. Sarah talked about it. We have a program called ICANN. We service over 4,000 people a year. And so we have an opportunity to have a real in-reach while individuals are incarcerated or detained. We're working with them to address some of the barriers in terms of mental health, substance use, and really thinking about the ways they think about themselves and think about the work. And then that continues when they reach the community with the opportunity, as Chris talked about, to find either employment, educational or vocational attainment, which I think for our men and women that are coming home, it's something really tangible for them to reach for. And with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, piloting this initiative, it's really a great opportunity for us to really offer something substantial and tangible for our participants. Oftentimes we talk about doing something different and changing their lives, but this is a real investment in helping individuals change their lives, because there is something at the end of the road. It's not just the mythical. There is something out there. We really have opportunities out there for the men and women when they return to the community. And as an organization, we believe in individuals having lived experience are the best people to convey the message.
Mm-hmm. And Councilman, this is like directed to you. This is a pivotal moment, right, in this whole the incarceration movement in New York and America. And, reentry to the community will obviously be key, to like ending mass incarceration a reality. What are some of the key policy changes? And the rest of the panel can chime in too. But Councilman, what are some key policy changes that have been made or that you think still need to be made?
Yeah. Well, look, the Jail to Jobs program is a good place to be, amongst the mix of things where we're actually looking at services when you leave. There's a warped thing about this, which is that when you're in a jail, you can get mental health services, you can get job training and things like that right in that place, but that can't be the only place where you're getting it. It shouldn't be. We don't even want people to go there. So having both, not just the short term, but the long term, and I presume many people here are involved in that long term goal too, which is having long term places for people to get employed. Two is breaking down barriers to employment for people that were incarcerated. Many people know this, but like Rikers Island, for example, is filled with people who are awaiting trial, have not been found guilty. And so breaking down barriers to employment. So the city's taken steps like ban the box or other things around your personal history. And I think there's more ways we can lean into that, so that anybody who's coming out of jail or coming out of prison is not having a barrier to employment in any good paying job that they can take. And three is, it goes without saying, but like the idea that we should be preventing people from being incarcerated in the first place is a big part of it. And I believe both when you leave, but even before that, having a job can really be transformative to you. And the last thing I'd say is when we shouldn't not just talk about jobs, but good paying jobs and how much they pay and how they let you move up the ladder, how they make you go from that initial job to the next level. And the city has tried to, the city of New York has tried to restructure its workforce program here to better reflect escalation. But I will say, I think as elected officials, we have to do a better job of being involved in that process, because I suspect many elected officials don't spend that much time thinking about the workforce programs in the city, or certainly not enough detail, as I'm sure many of the people here do. So it's really getting more involved, thinking about the good paying jobs, and realizing that the job can be part of the solution to preventing incarceration in the first place.
And I saw all of you like shaking your heads. You're talking about jobs that hasn't earned a livable wage, right? Any comments on that?
It's interesting. Actually, something I learned here at the conference, it really got me thinking. We were talking earlier, like the idea of municipal hiring. The city has about 380,000 folks working for it. And I heard this stat today. Over the next 5 years, about 100,000 of them will approach retirement age. So even if a quarter of that actually retired, you'd be looking at needing to fill 25,000 jobs. At the same time, you have people who leave state prisons a year after leaving, 50% are unemployed. So, we can see the mismatch here. There is a demand for good employees, and there are programs and initiatives that can help people to be work ready and who are eager to work. And we see that in our work, at CEO, we made over 800 job placements last program year. So, and our employers come back to us time and time again. So I think that we should be thinking about these challenges and kind of integrative solutions. Two things I'll mention from a policy perspective I think are important. One is to really consider how to unlock government procurement to provide more transitional employment. So not asking the city or state to spend more money, but can you use the contracting power that is already being used with city and state agencies to say, let's create more opportunities for people who have criminal convictions to get access to work. That could be, demands that contractors actually hire people explicitly, particularly if they're working in neighborhoods like the neighborhood I live in Bedford-Stuyvesant, that have historically been neighborhoods where the population for prisons and jails have come from. We could look at that. The other thing I'll mention is that the population on Rikers that has not gone down are parole violators. We should be looking at reforms that reduce the use of technical parole violations. Probation agencies have done this. We see that these violations have no bearing. These are the kinds of things, they're non-criminal. They're behaviors like violating a curfew and other kinds of behaviors that an individual parole officer might see as something that they don't want to see from someone. And that could land someone back in jail and back in prison. We can reform that, we can change that, we can bring that number down and not compromise public safety. So those are two kind of things that we could look at to really change the game and I think help people get back into the workforce system.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts, Sarah, Gyasi?
Yeah, I would definitely echo what's been said. I think I would also be remiss if I didn't bring some stats into the conversation.
Sure.
Being from Makche. Since the mayor took office in 2013, the overall jail population has gone down 27%. Arrests have gone down 29%. There are 41% fewer people coming into jail with misdemeanor charges, and there are 36% fewer people coming in on bail of $2,000 and less. And so there have been quite a few policy changes that have created this very intentionally. Through, and I know we'll talk about this soon, but through partnerships with a whole host of folks, the courts, DAs, defense, service providers. And we obviously still have a ways to go, but it seems like there's definitely progress. And on the jobs front, for sure, there's the Jails to Jobs initiative is a good place to start and a way to help people stabilize so that they're not coming back in on the back end.
Mm-hmm. I'll touch a little bit on the living wage component. I think that Jails to Jobs is a great start. It provides individuals a temporary opportunity to stabilize themselves, because oftentimes when men and women come home, put in a permanent situation, a permanent employment situation, they often stumble. But with the transitional employment opportunity, they have an opportunity to succeed, fail, succeeds, fail, and have the support of organizations like ourselves, CEO, et cetera, to continue their progress towards permanent employment. But the ultimate goal would be a livable wage, because one of the panels talked about diversification or gentrification in housing, and we all know how housing can be in New York City. And so that livable wage will be a great step towards making sure our men and women that are coming out of the jail system and prison system have an opportunity to at least apply and hopefully be considered for some housing that can stabilize their lives and really transform their lives.
Sure.
I just want to make one more point,
Sure.
which is that the recent events have really also shown that being employed inside of a jail or prison is predominantly a low wage endeavor. And I think the last directive from New York City, there's jobs as low as 17 cents an hour. And me and my colleagues have raised a question of whether that is the appropriate amount. I'll give you a sneak preview. We don't think it is. But I think that the reason the strikes in the prisons and the jail amounts are making, when they come out of the jail and they don't have money, and they end up in the shelter in the intake center in my district on 30th Street, one wonders whether if they were getting paid, better wages for the work they were doing that they could use when they get out, that would also be somewhat of a support system upon exiting.
Sure, and earlier, Sarah, you mentioned that the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice has identified 7 organizations to which funding has gone to for Jails to Jobs, Fortune, Osborne, CEO, and others. And so the question now goes to what you mentioned a little bit earlier about this idea of partnership. So the question is, like, what were the strengths and challenges of working in a public-private partnership like Jails to Jobs? And don't all speak up at once. You can start, Gyasi, if you like.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'll start with the strength because, going from a strength-based perspective, Mock J has been great. Not saying that just because Sarah was on the stage. One of the things one of the things that they did when they created the contract is a cost reimbursement. So it really gives organizations an opportunity to try things out, and if they don't work out, still be able to make revenue. And I think that's important when you're starting a new program. Also, just the responsiveness of the Mock J staff in terms of dealing with us. And lastly, with the opportunity to really pick your partners, we've been able, with Osborne, to really pick partners that were able to meet the needs of our participants. So we have CEO as an organization that meets the need for immediate employment.
Sure.
And then we have Exponents, which is another organization that provides kind of that midterm or mid-length training opportunity. So 30 hours of training, and you have an opportunity to become a certified peer recovery coach, which oftentimes our men and women talk about giving back to the community. And this is a way for them to gain entrance into the field, may not have the ability to sit for the CASE Act right now, may not have the educational levels that a job description or an organization requires, but this is a real entrance point for a man and woman to get into the field and learn, and then further their progression into the field. And lastly, the HOPE program, which provides more long-term training opportunities, which leads to more career-based opportunities. Not saying that CEO and Exponents don't provide those opportunities, but we've been able to pick partners that were able to meet the needs of our participants. So I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about thus far with the relationship with Jails to Jobs.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of challenges, have there been any challenges that we've? I know Sarah's up here. No one wants to mention a challenge.
Sarah, you gotta close your ears, my friend.
They're natural challenges, right? It doesn't speak to like some kind of like weakness in some organization, but sometimes there are inherent challenges in rolling out some things.
I want to be honest, right, or not Pollyannish. Like, it is really hard to work within a correctional setting to do kind of empowerment work or support work. So I have deep appreciation for the folks at Osborne, who I know have kind of mastered this as best as anyone. Then I'm sorry that the Assistant Deputy Commissioner couldn't be here to kind of speak to that, because I think that, how our prisons and jails are structured and function is a challenge to helping people, and kind of treating them as human beings and helping them get connected to services. Mm-hmm. There are other things that I would like. I see a challenge that, we should get, do municipal hiring in the city. I see a challenge around having contracts like the contract we have with Mock J be not the exception, but the rule. Like, can we help nonprofits, strengthen our ability to actually scale these kinds of efforts? So, I think that there are kind of challenges that we have to confront collectively. And the last thing I'll mention doesn't get mentioned often, but I think it is important. There is a fair amount of discrimination that goes on in, the hiring system, I dare say even in the workforce system, right? If you're incentivized to get someone a job and have them keep that job for a period of time, working with our population is not where you want to be, right? So you're working with some 25-year-old who's come out of Rikers, who's never worked, doesn't have a high school diploma, may be angry, may be depressed, does not make a good performance outcome. So I give a lot of credit to my staff and the team at CEO and our partners at Osborne, because it takes a lot of work to produce an outcome. And so we need to think about ways, how do you get the performance that you need, but also pay for that performance, like, provide the resources needed to make that, to make that happen. So I'm not, I think Mock J's been terrific too on the data. I just want to say, like, that data is a kind of guiding light towards what we should be looking to do. So you want to approach any effort like this with really strong kind of data to which you're kind of managing towards.
And I just would add a little bit to your point, which is like we have to be realistic about what our goals are on the outset, and then whether we're meeting them, and whether we should be changing course if they're not working. And I find that to be one of the biggest resistant points often, is that we sort of reinforce things that we want to work but aren't working, and we should actually be restructuring them. And the second part is, this is not a mock J complaint by any means, but the city just sometimes slow and bad about procurement. And if you have a city contract and you're doing procurement, it's just an arduous process. And I've heard from a lot of workforce groups in other areas who are ready to reshuffle the deck to meet some new demand, but we're waiting for the contracts to come out the door, or waiting for the money to show up, or starting to do work and don't have the money to do the work. So this is like a little bit nerdier, but procurement reform to where we can make it work better for providers is another place where I think we have a lot of work to do. I just said that to get the applause. What do you kid? No, it is certainly true.
Okay. And we're going to be wrapping up. Any other comments on that, thoughts on that?
I think the last challenge for us is just the programmatic reporting. Systems don't always align with one another. So getting something where programs can track each other. You know, we have 7 main jails to jobs providers, but there's no clear system to pass information from one provider to the other. So oftentimes a participant doesn't necessarily get the warm handoff. They may have to retell his or her story, and oftentimes, you know, people that are doing direct services realize that can lead to attrition. So I think, you know, developing some kind of system for all program providers, not specifically jails to jobs, but a way in which we can really pass information for participants to make sure that their journey is a lot smoother.
Yeah, I would just add that in terms of a strength, really our providers are such a strength and really have fantastic expertise in the field and working with this population that is definitely hard to engage. And so we ensure that there's a lot of feedback going on all the time. I'm not going to say sick of seeing each other all the time, but we have so many meetings, but just to make sure that this is really being rolled out in the right way. Jails to Jobs is also a very young initiative. Services really just went on the ground in this past April, so and providers are still staffing up a bit, and so we're still learning things. The lessons have not all been learned and now applied. And I would just say, just in terms of what Gyasi was saying around a challenge that we know exists is around communication between providers, that because people come in with a lot of different needs, it's sometimes hard to make sure that the right referrals are happening and getting people to where they really need to be. And so that's something that we're also thinking about how to support in order to create better communication and coordination so that the client really gets all the services that they need.
And so we have about 3 minutes left, and we're going to be wrapping up. So I just last, lessons learned. You touched on a little bit, Sarah, but there's anything else from you, Gyasi, Chris, Councilman, in terms of lessons learned with the launching of Jails to Jobs? What would you say you learned about what it takes to get a transformative program like this going? Sarah, you touched on a little bit. Gyasi, Chris, Councilman, if you have any thoughts on that as we move to our closing.
I'll give it a shot. It's a $10 million investment from the city out of a $90 billion budget. And I feel like, and then this is a city council criticism as much as anything else, which is we spend a lot of money, but we actually should be looking for these innovative programs to try. And like I said, if they don't work, we should actually be willing to scale them back or change them. But for a sort of modest investment, we have an opportunity, and I'm sure you guys will be coming for more money. But when we have opportunities, we should be making investments to try programs that we think can be transformative and inventive and do a better job of it, I think, entirely. So one lesson learned is for $10 million is a lot of money. It's not a short amount of money, but in the scale of the percentage of what it accounts for in a $90 billion budget, seems like an investment that's worth making and assessing.
Sure. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think for lessons learned, it's really about the whole process. We talk about the individual when they're incarcerated or detained. We talk about them when they come home and finding employment, but there's a real piece at the end of that, and it can't be understated, housing. We really need to figure out a way in which to tie housing into this whole process and transition, because it's important for individuals to have a place to stay, to even really think about finding stable employment, full-time permanent employment. So I think one of the things that we want to really think about is the full picture of helping someone transition back into society. So that's not just, getting services while he or she is detained, coming back home, finding employment or vocational attainment, but really solidifying that with some housing, some affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
I would totally agree on the housing front. And the other area this project has us thinking about, and other work we're doing, is how to create kind of apprenticeship opportunities for folks who are coming out of incarceration.
Sarah, Gyasi, Chris, Councilman, thank you so much. Listening audience, thank you so much. Let's give them a warm round of applause. Thank you very much, everyone.